in their search for truth. When Mikuláš entered, he made an attempt to spot the new vicar just by impression of the face. Many he did of course recognize as colleagues from the school of Mensis, but examining the clerics, the first impression he got was that many of them seemed very young, be it just a little under his own age. Granted, himself was too somewhat of an oddity when picturing the age of an headmaster. Perhaps it was a sign that the new was replacing the old, and he felt amused by the thought. 4 individuals stood before the fireplace, not yet seated around the table, chatting amongst themselves. Out of the 23 individuals that were slowly taking their seats, he figured the vicar was one of them. He approached and made his guess.
Good morning, Mikuláš.
The young man with blue eyes, short blonde hair and a stoic impression that did not strike Mikuláš as completely convincing, reached to grab his hand. Yes, Provost Mikuláš. It is a pleasure, Oscar. One of his peers made a barely noticeable nudge at his back, and the man corrected himself. Vicar, Oscar.
I thought so.
Mikuláš smiled and continued to hastily greet the other 3.
I wish to offer my condolences personally. I was not particularly close with the late Vicar Harald, but I can imagine you all were.
He was a great mentor to many of us. His passing is lined with mourning. Please. He gestured for a chair and sat himself down, and in doing so, every other member was quick to find a seat for themselves as well. Everyone seemed keen on hearing what the vicar would open the session with, but was dismayed when he leaned in towards Mikuláš for a much lower conversation.
I have always been intrigued with the work of Mensis, well before the possession of my title. I see. Well, the work is important. It actually began with the arcane mysteries that the old institution of Bergenworth touched upon many years ago now.
Oscar nodded, firmly maintaining eye contact. Yes, indeed. It has always played an important part in my studies. But regardless, I cannot help but feel its studies may have been diluted by the blood, so to speak.
Pardon?
What I mean to say, well, I actually attended a few classes at the school when I was younger. Although the church's work is virtuous and necessary for the well-being for all of Yharnam, perhaps the agenda has warped the intent with the arcane, as you call it.
You might be right there, Vicar. But no need to feel that way, for it is the purpose of Mensis to unravel the arcane mysteries. The old blood has yet many mysteries to be unlocked, I'm sure, left for a capable vicar to seek.
The compliment fell on deaf ears as Oscar's eyes had sunk and now only lay absent-mindedly towards the table.
You are of course welcome to personally oversee our operations, Vicar.
I just... He scratched at his temple. Just that. Could it not be a melding of the two? The blood and... His eyes had begun to flicker with uncertainty, and his voice had become even lower, bordering on a whisper. And the beasts. There must be a good answer out there. Mikolash had him all figured out. Why it was him that held the title of vicar, he could not completely argue. A sentimental error on Harald's part could be plausible. But regardless, before him sat a boy, frightened of the night, yet curious of it. In some years to come, he could indeed become a great vicar that perhaps even could finish Lauren's work. But for now, perhaps it was best he tended to the church as best as he was able, as Mikolash had his own legacy to uphold. Mikolash was somewhat unfocused on the presentation currently given in the men's lecture hall. He was peering around with a sly smirk, proud of the excitement every scholar was showing.
And subsequently proven that such capture of light is indeed possible. Testing of the prototype has already been concluded. However, there is still room for improvement as we proceed from here.
He drifted off once more, as he was distracted by a grumpy, old-looking scholar with oversized mutton chops, scribbling down seemingly every word of the presentation in his notebook. He was amused at the engagement he had created.
As it is very sensitive, and may not pick up the entirety of the spectrum, which may be unfortunate, since much light pollution makes it hard to discern the pure cosmic rays that would provoke the hypothesized outcome.
The spokesman put down his pointer and walked away from the cluttered blackboard, rounding up the lecture.
I direct you to the lower atrium for inspection of the so far constructed devices. An instructional course will be held at 3 o'clock for its utilization. And that will be all for me, and I wish us all the best of luck as we properly commence next week.
The inspired minds applauded him as he gathered up his papers into a coffer. The hall echoed with the movement of several scholars standing and gathering their own materials. The humming and muttering of low private voices added to the cacophony that began flowing towards the exit door. Mikolash sat and waited. So did Professor Cuthford, who had helmed the lecture. When only a few lingering presences slowed their way out, Mikolash stood.
I applaud you. Very expertly informed.
Cuthford nodded thankfully and stood in front of the desk, hands resting on the surface behind him.
Thank you. Have the, mystic arrived?
He sounded curious, yet a slight reluctance intruded on the latter phrasing.
She is waiting in the other room. We spoke briefly before you started. Come.
He walked to the left end of the lecture room, where a door awaited him. Cuthford collected his coffer and followed along. Inside a general office sat a woman at one of 3 desks, with her head turned towards a window, with a view overlooking the school proper. Her hair flowed elegantly behind her, and she wore a grey dress with black floral pattern.
Thank you for your patience, my lady. Now we are completely available to address our workings together. This is Professor Cuthford, who is the spearhead of the research department you will be working with.
She stood and left her small purse in the seat.
A pleasure, Professor Cuthford. And Leica.
Charmed.
They shook hands, and Cuthford bowed slightly.
I must say he is an invaluable asset to our institution. Ever heard about Bergenworth?
The name may be familiar.
I gathered as much. At any rate, it is from there our main query hails, an ode to Mr. Cuthford's previous studies at the institution. We have had the pleasure of continuing it here at Menzies.
Mikuláš sat down, and next to him followed Cuthford.
The pleasure is all mine. Now, I'm sure you have had the opportunity with the provost, but would you mind telling me the details of your experiences?
Yes, of course. I grew up in Hemwick. My family has, since anyone can remember, been affiliated with the Canehurst line. We were occasionally summoned for our experiences, mostly being the women. My father, and his father before him, oversaw a large farmstead, due to our good standing with the court.
Mikuláš and his associate nodded and hummed occasionally during her tale.
The nobles were fascinated with our predictions and adored our visits, though I must admit, we likely only told them what I wanted to hear.
She trailed off, growing more serious and perhaps even slightly mournful.
But there always was a truth to it, even if it were wrapped in their favor. They always came true in a sense. I never believed a word of it. I wanted to inherit the farm, you see. But then, times changed.
We can skip that part, if it makes you uncomfortable.
Mikuláš said benevolently.
Yes. Probably best so.
How did you come to Yharnam?
Oh, my father was long dead and my mother was terribly sick. As sad as it sounds, I never got along with mother. So I moved to town and opened up a pottery shop. Only when a good friend of mine was studying under Lady Carrill did my past come back into my life.
You learned from Lady Carrill herself?
Cuthford leaned forward in his chair, arms still crossed, and eyes dumbfounded.
Oh no, that was way before my time.
Oh. He leaned back and composed himself.
No, I studied with Lady Emily. The friend I mentioned knew of my, well, heritage, so to speak, and practically dragged me along. It was interesting, and only then did my eyes open for new possibilities.
Micolash leaned over to Cuthford.
Emily being Caryl's direct successor.
He nodded.
Impressive. Did you study long?
Oh, let's see. 7 years, perhaps? It was Emily that recommended I search for more professional positions, and then this came along.
So you are newly graduated, one could say?
Well, I did work with the healing church along with Lady Emily, but after the tragedy, she left the profession. And I suppose that is the reason I am branching out on my own now.
Cuthford turned to Micolash and shrugged in satisfaction.
Positively charming story. I'm so looking forward working with you. Master Micolash appears utterly convinced of your abilities, and so do I.
She smiled and averted her eyes, blushing lightly.
Very good.
Micolash stood.
You will start tomorrow, but your duties will only begin at the beginning of next week. You'll want to be informed and accustom yourself in that time. Perhaps you can spend today familiarizing yourself with the proper. If you have any questions, please refer to the documentation I gave you. You can also, of course, find me in my office most of the time.
Oh, thank you. There is this. I was thinking, what exactly does optical stimuli entail? I mean, what might I expect?
Great question. It will be a pleasure answering it.
He moved over behind a desk and opened a deep drawer in the wall-side cabinet. The drawer was marked Dream and possessed a small archive of documents organized by letter. He picked one that generally explained the process she had been referring to and handed it to her.
Take this if you want more details. But the summary of it is that we will start a process of research that revolves around dreaming in various capacities. We have uncovered that certain light, pure light emitted from the cosmos, the stars, if you will, has an effect on our dreams. This hypothesis explains many worldwide cultural phenomena and influences, and by carefully filtering light through specifically crafted lenses, we might control the contents of a dream. That is naturally where you come in, to observe and confirm the contents. There will be a presentation that I am sure will clarify tomorrow. It is an intricate process, and we understand some details might seem strange. But rest assured, with some time within the process, it will become clearer.
right. Thank you, Master Mikolash.
Perhaps you would like a tour of the school? Cuthbert offered as he stood. She followed and stood too, holding her little purse.
I would be delighted.
Shall we? He gestured towards the exit, and they left for the sights of Mensis. He had no particular reason for remaining, but he found the view from the window particularly stunning that day, like it had been made just for him to enjoy. Anleika walked into the session chamber after having nodded to the statuesque Mr. Dealybolt, sitting in a chair right beside the door. A quaint chamber with a grand circular window in the tilted ceiling. Mirrors lined the evenly long walls, 3 on each, currently covered with drapes. There sat a woman on one of the 2 beds. Otherwise the room was void of furniture.
Good day. I am Anleika, and I will be the one overseeing this session.
She reached for the woman, her hand being received by a hesitant grip.
Molly. A pleasure to meet you, Molly. So, this is very simple. It only requires you to dream. I assure you, even if you don't recall the dream, you will still have one. That's just how dreams work. There is no pressure. It will be like any time you fall asleep, up until you wake up. This procedure cannot predict what dreams you will have. At least, no more than you yourself can.
Her smile had a woman's shoulder sink slightly.
Take as long as you like. We are in no hurry. I will lie next to you. This here.
She pointed to the hemisphere apparatus with an internal reflective silvery surface, looking like a decorative bowl standing on a low table. At one point in the edge, a piece had been taken out for the neck to fit.
This will be placed under your head once you are asleep. It is part of the experiment, for the light to properly be received. It is implemented later, as it might be a bit uncomfortable. But I understand it might still be hard for some to fall asleep under these conditions. So in order to make you feel at ease, we have sedatives if you wish. The whole session will be around 4 hours. All right?
Molly nodded feverishly.
Any questions before we begin? No.
She replied shortly and quickly shook her head.
I think I'll take the sedatives, please. Very good.
She gave her the little flask that contained about 2 gulps worth of liquid. She examined the open flask skeptically, cast a quick glance at Anleika, then back at the flask and drank it in one swoop. She took the flask from her.
Now, lie down.
She gently guided her with her hand over her chest, down to the bed. After which she stood and sat down on the adjacent bed. Molly tilted her head upward.
You are going to sleep too? Oh, yes. It's part of the session. It is a means to monitor your dream. Think of it like me looking through a window into your sleeping mind. Will it affect my dream? No, not at all. Will the sedative feel strange? Not at all. You will start to feel very tired at any moment now.
Molly adjusted herself, restlessly turning in her bed. But soon she grew stillsome, and further on did she start to breathe slightly louder and calmer. Anleika rang the bell at her bedstand, and Mr. Dealibolt came inside. She arose from the bed she sat on, and together they unveiled the mirrors on the walls. As she returned to lay herself down onto the bed, Mr. Dealibolt was tugging at one of the ropes hanging beside the ceiling window. It was connected to a differently shaded glass lens that he dragged over the window, which made the room considerably darker while a dim light still entered. Even with the dull shone, the mirrors enabled light to shine a bit more brightly in the room. He dragged over another lens that had no discernible alterations to it and looked just like clear glass. Unlike the unprofessional sleeper, she could put herself into a dream on command. Now, she just had to attune herself to her surroundings. On her own bedside table stood the arcane tuning fork that she hit with a metal rod before laying herself comfortably and closing her eyes. In that time, she saw Dealibolt gently lifting up Molly's head to rest it back into the reflective hemisphere, so it encompassed her head like a massive bowl. She listened for how the sound merged with the world. She heard the two individuals breathing louder and more distinguishable, the sound itself growing more apparent. She unfocused Mr. Dealibolt's sounds and directed her faculties on Molly's. The rhythmic and peaceful breathing started to carry a voice within it, like a whispered, slow uttering of a single syllable. With the monotone tone of the tuning fork, it felt almost like plucking sounds out of a great ocean while submerging others simply by her own will, making them either more dampened or amplified in her mind. It would take time to tell what word it was, and if said word was even known to her. She tuned in on the sound, its essence, and made herself sleep. The distinction between the waking and sleep was hard when one dreamed like she did. She recalled the initial worry and slight fright of a novice slumber during her tutelage period in the past. Now she simply looked where Mr. Dealibolt had stood. He was no longer there. She looked over at Molly. She and her bed was gone. It started to knock on the door, but she need not answer. She sat up and walked over to the lone window in the room. A window that had not been there previously. Outside was not Yarnum and the schools proper. She was looking down at a large ballroom. It was monstrously large, and in the middle was a very small long table, in comparison to the gargantuan setting. The windows were enormous, as well as the door. Food of every kind crowded the table. large roasted chickens, sausages, fruits, mashed potatoes, and every other conceivable dish. They looked as if they had no sense of taste, since they all had been served very haphazardly, like if a child had grabbed plates with food and just placed them most conveniently. Some even, quite deliberately, spilled over onto others. An entire herring lay in the brown sauce, and the mash was sprinkled with pickles. Around the table sat comically dressed individuals, though some looked very plain. What mostly drew her eye was their faces. They were a blur and would sometimes flash a human expression of a face unknown, only to shift back into a morphing obscurity. The plain-addressed ones did retain their faces longer and had more of a prominent feature beneath the unseeing veil. Soon she noticed Molly sitting at the table. She was constantly interrupted with her eating by loud bangs on the giant door, which caused her to visibly interrupt her dining efforts from the bother. Occasionally a large, shadowy figure would float past the windows. In comparison to the dinner guests, this figure was a giant and would certainly reach up to the ceiling of the impressive hall. Each time the hall trembled from the tremorous knocks, she would look behind her seat towards the door, while the others sat and ate peacefully. The guest would sometimes completely vanish or make irregular movements in their seats, such as attempting a dance, but only with their upper body. Aleika opened the window and leaned out to shout down at her.
"Open the door! Open it!"
She repeated the command without acknowledgement from Molly. In due time, when the knocking came, Molly stood in her seat. She walked over to the door and tugged at the large, round door handles. She made some attempts to drag without result. Then she started to push. This made the door open, just a smidgen. She continued until a crack large enough to fit her person had been made. A smoke of blackness poured out, and she disappeared into it. Aleika went back to her bed and lay down. She tried to get a sense of where Molly had gone. To her surprise, she felt alone, like this was her dream. Before, Molly's presence had been clear as day, but when she entered through the door, she had vanished. But to where? She lay still, attempting to create a picture in the dark ceiling. Soon enough, the similar black smoke covered the wooden planks above her. The knocking had stopped. There definitely were shapes within the darkness. Or could it just be the shifting smoke? An eye suddenly opened, perfectly round and yellow. Then she woke up. She was surprised by the sudden awakening. On the other side sat Mr. Dealibolt with a limp arm around the inconsolable and heaving Molly. She threw herself up to the woman's side.
"What happened? What do you remember?" There... Now, breathe with me."
She started to make articulate breaths while seeking Molly's eyes. She constantly looked away in the distant beyond, but she did start to mimic her breathing advice.
Now try and tell me. It is important before you forget.
She maniacally shook her head.
I'll never forget. I hope I do, but I'll never forget. What happened? Please tell us. I was in a large room. I think I was with my family just having supper. There was a knock on the door, and I went to open it. Someone on the other side wanted me to come with him. I did not think about it. I just went. Then he started to move, strangely delayed. He could move his arm.
She looked at Anleika and showed her a standard upward motion with her own arm.
Then another would remain in place where it once was. He continued to move and make arms until I barely saw the man. Just arms. 1,000 legs crawling like a centipede behind him, and a giant head made out of many smaller heads. It was also real. The feeling will fade. It always does. Did anything else happen? When he stopped growing, so many arms reached out to touch my face. They did not move closer, but just grew out at me. They burrowed inside my face, my head, and it felt so real.
I've checked her conditions, Mr. Dealebolt said. She has had a trauma shock. Her pulse needs to become stable and she cannot stand. She should stay here for a time to recover.
All right. You can go do the report.
He nodded and left the room. Upon entering through the door, she saw Mikolash behind a dark, almost black, wooden desk. Across the large empty floor, he sat in a squaric inlet on the opposite side, where the walls of the alcove were covered with tall bookshelves, ending in the ceiling. He stood up, leaning forward with both hands on the wooden surface, like a predator ready to pounce.
Fine work. Very fine work,
he said with a grimace as he moved around the furniture.
Well, come on in. We have plenty to speak of.
She did so, not being smitten by the maniacal exhilaration.
You read the recent case?
Oh, I did. Unlike the rest who seem not to grasp the breakthrough, I cannot contain myself for what is to come.
His joyous smile turned upside down very fast.
Perhaps if they would take matters with the professionalism that it is due, then they would see the utter foolishness of their behavior.
The case, Provost.
She was desperate for an end to the frustration she had apparently walked right into, or perhaps inadvertently triggered. He did manage to get a hold of himself, and looked, in fact, rather embarrassed for being caught in such a state.
Apologies. In all honesty, it can be a mess at times, being Provost. But yes, I would like to discuss the results. As I was saying, this is a breakthrough.
How so?
He pulled out a chair with leathery inlays and motioned for her to take a seat. Once she did, he returned into his office nook and sat opposite her.
I did read, and it was not the first time I noticed a pattern, now clear to me. Perhaps you know of what I speak.
She suspected she did, but shook her head, rather wanting him to just continue.
This character, the many arms, so to speak, is it not strange it has occurred in more than just one dream?
Her guess was right. As soon as she heard Molly's account of what she saw beyond her own window, she had taken notice of it.
It is indeed.
Humour me. What do you, a professional, think it is?
I wouldn't. A professional. Well, I would say it does have some things in common. It is but my own speculation. But I believe our dreams are coming from somewhere. Like another world, perhaps. And that when these dreams are the same, perhaps they all were taken to the same place.
He raised a curious and intrigued eyebrow.
Taken, you say? Taken by who?
Oh, I did, perhaps, not mean it literally.
Oh, but you did. You must have. You see, that is what that many arms is. In a very simple fashion, something is reaching out for them, yet none have stepped over the edge. Why is that?
She waited, thinking it a rhetorical question. It would turn out not to be the case, as he continued to stare extensively straight at her.
Maybe they are waking up.
But no, not quite so simple.
No?
You see, it's about the tuning, about the proper light. Experiments without the hemisphere have a much less vivid interaction with this something, if at all. Our theory is proven correct, and we can indeed facilitate an encounter. For tests, the helmets are able to go further and see things clearer. The answer is light, Andeka. Light indeed carries the influence of the great ones.
It would make sense, yes. But can we confirm that is the case?
We already have. He shot up, sounding angry, but had a wide smile on his face. The figure is the proof. Someone is reaching out to these people. But why? Because they are stimulated by the correct light. Light surrounds them and alters their dreams. It cannot be a coincidence that these new dreamers are so lucid, so specific. All about an entity trying to reach out.
She had unwillingly sunk down a bit in her seat. He positioned himself back in the armchair, hands folded together on the desk.
All right. Then, what is the next step, sir?
2 things. I would like to have you, yourself, dream. Attempt the journey as they do and make contact with this figure. If possible. There will be more mystics employed for better results. Secondly, we must stimulate patients further. More direct light, as well as inquiry into what is the receiver.
A receiver?
Well, something must receive the light. Just like how our eyes process the things we see, it all must end up somewhere inside our heads.
She had already considered the potential in examining these shared visages with her own intellect and experience, and was not surprised at his request. She was, however, concerned about his curiosity for this receiver. Mikolash indulged another sip of tea. Grimacing from the bitter herb taste, he became aware he had left the tea holder in too long, but he did not mind the taste. He flipped up the new documentation. Subject fell into the desired sleep state within 15 minutes of taking the sedative. No visual reaction was provoked upon the hemisphere being placed beneath the head. Observer entered the dream without issue. 3 amplifiers were placed accordingly around the subject's head. The session ended with the subject, after the aforementioned 20 minutes, waking up in a state of mild confusion and uncomfort. The awakening seemed forced, as the subject suddenly sat up, ripped straight from the dream by all accounts. Below the procedure paragraph was the headline of Dream Contents. The subject walked hand in hand with a large figure with many arms, resembling someone he knew but could not place exactly who. He was uncertain if it was clothed in a cloak or if it was just the body. The dream had been lucid as desired, and he recalled wanting to, out of fear, release the grip. As Mrs. Windby attested to, having encouraged him to maintain the hold, the grip was ultimately not released. Before being walked into a deep fog, he managed to release himself and ran, waking up. Mrs. Winby's recollection after waking up shortly after the subject, 1 minute, proved welcoming, as she was indeed able to linger in the subject's dream. Upon interacting with the figure, it did not respond to her presence. Upon attempting to enter the fog, she was awakened. She recalled the same information about the dream as the subject, but in more lucid detail. The subject had been walking with a humanoid figure double the size of the patient on the outskirts of a farm, initially not possessing additional arms. The pastures had grown empty of cattle, and shortly after the humanoid had begun sprouting additional arms, which was only noticed by the subject after the arm growth had seemingly stopped. When it became apparent to Mrs. Winby that the figure was, by her impression, guiding the subject towards the fog, she had encouraged him to follow. But as mentioned, fear overtook the subject. By means unknown, the dream persisted after the subject's awakening, which was not prompted by her active doing. Although she too did not remain long by reasons still unknown. Mikuláš laid the document to the pile with the rest, leaned back and sipped his tea. He pondered the causes in excited engagement. What if this figure was indeed their contact? Someone finally reaching out to them? It had been several years after all. Years that they surely must have shined like a lighthouse for the great beings beyond. And now they finally reached out. A deep sense of naivety flowed over him. Silly thinking. He was a scientist, after all, and although sometimes the greatest discoveries were just stumbled upon by accident, it was not appropriate to sit and dream of an answer. No, if they wished to peer beyond, they would have to find the way themselves. But could they? Humanity had been in the same state for at least a millennia now. How could he hope to change all that, here and now? His hand holding the cup trembled involuntarily, and he placed it on the desk. He folded his hands together and looked up into the ceiling. Dreaming proved more mysterious than he imagined. It was a funny thing. Was it so foolish to think that the great gods had a world of their own? Could that very world be our dreams, and the bridge leading to it be made of light? He returned to the documentations to review the next. Similarly as before, the manner of conducting was alike. He noted that the dream had been more detailed, however, but the cause he was not able to deduce from the preceding arrangement. The subject had been aware of the mystic dreaming with him and recognized him in the dream. Both of them then witnessed trees beginning to grow from under them. Among the quickly sprouting trees grew a new type of growth, arms, reaching out and growing longer and longer towards the clouded sky. They had jumped on a hand as it was growing and went along upwards. By this time, in the waking world, the subject had violently begun to tremble all over and frothing at the mouth. Emergency dictated that they wakened the subject. Without knowing, they had spoiled the culmination of the dream, as it was interrupted so suddenly for both of them. Mikuláš felt a slight defeat, potentially having been so close. His thoughts drifted to the topic of the amygdala. He glanced over at the dark blue covered book made by the late Vicar Lawrence in a bygone time. Such genius. To think that he made such a discovery in an afternoon. Granted, many hours of research followed, but the idea came just like that. He wondered where that idea might have come from. Perhaps it even was the gods, nudging him along. And perhaps it even was in their great plan that this little nudge would in turn nudge him in this time.
Student uniform. Uniform of the students of Byrgenwerth, a bygone institute of learning, features a thick cape. The healing church has its roots in Byrgenwerth, and naturally borrows heavily from its uniform design. The focus not on knowledge or thought, but on pure pretension, would surely bring Master Willem to despair, if only he knew.